The problem is of course your timing, the waiting part. Everybody has this like sense of hesitation. So as a section leader, we of course have to find ways to give them the confidence to know that, okay, we're going to be moving here. Don't hesitate so much. And after that, we sort of get the hang of it.
I am such a fan of today's guest. He's been on the podcast several times over the years, and it's always a pleasure to connect with him. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations. We are talking today with Aaron Olguin, who is the principal bassist for the Trondheim Symphony Orchestra in Norway, has done so many incredible things. I think the last time I talked to him was at the International Society of Bassists Convention in 2019. He did a fantastic solo recital there, a lot of Andres Martin's music. And this is the first time I've actually talked to Aaron remotely. Everything I've done with Aaron before has been in person. And boy, do I miss in person. But we'll get back together and do something in person again, maybe even in Norway, maybe even at the end of 2021. We shall see. The reason that Aaron and I are connecting today, although I would have him on the show happily every week, he's such an interesting person, we're talking about bass section playing, bass principal playing, how to line up a bass section, why people think the bass sections are late, are bass sections late. I used some of this material for a recent video on the topic, but Aaron and I got into all sorts of other things as will happen and just kind of a general life update and how things are going for him. That's what today's episode is. I really hope that you enjoy it. Quick shout out to our sponsors, Dorico, Ear Trumpet Labs, Practisma, and Modacity. More on them later. And here we go with the great and powerful Aaron Olguin. What's up, Aaron? How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you, Jason?
All right, good. You're sporting some NASA gear. That's awesome. I love it.
Oh yeah, you have to. You have to in these times.
What's it like in the colony? That's like suburban Dallas, right? Are you home right now? What's it like in December there? Is it chilly?
It's like 70 degrees right now.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's really nice. Yeah, but it's supposed to drop, and it's going to get a little bit cooler here for Christmas and all that. But yeah, it's so up and down. This is the one thing I really didn't like about this area growing up, is that one day you'll have like ice and super cold winds, and then 2 days later it's sunny, and your body just doesn't know how to deal with it. The plants don't, so you're just always reacting to the allergies, and yeah.
Well, I think ice storms, whenever I think of that part of the country, it's bad enough to like cause problems, for a chunk of the year. It seems like.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly that. We had that crazy ice apocalypse, 6 years ago or something like that. And it would just ice, and then everything would just get ice all over it. And then it would melt, because then it would get super warm for 2 days. And then it just kept doing that for almost 2 weeks. And it was terrible. So classes were canceled, bus routes were canceled, and it was rough.
What's winter in Trondheim like? Is it?
Yeah,
it's serious business.
It's not so bad, actually. It's right. Trondheim is right by the fjord, so it's pretty regulated. It has this huge hill on the west side, so it blocks out a lot of the crazy winds, and whenever the snow comes in, it's already kind of dampened down by both the fjord and the big hill. So we just get a lot of snow. But it really kind of hangs around, and not so much wind, and it kind of just hangs out, and it isn't so bad. I kind of got used to it pretty quickly, I think.
Okay, cool. It sounds beautiful. It sounds like a beautiful. I got to visit. I know I will visit when travel becomes a thing again. So. What? So you were
especially, and I hope things are.
Oh, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we're fine.
There's a bit of a delay.
Yeah, we got delayed for a second, but it's all good. I think we're welcome to 2020.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. No, but I was just going to say, hopefully it would be really cool to have you up in Trondheim in November, especially. I just got asked to do the Kusevitsky concerto, and I'm scheduled to do it in November, November 11th. So hopefully it'd be really cool to have you up in Norway around that time.
Oh man, I would love to go. How's it been with the pandemic there? It's been not handled particularly well in the US, and now California, it's so infuriating because now California is the worst place in the US, and we've been locked down the longest too. So I'm just sitting here slowly losing my mind. How's it been in Norway?
In Trondheim, especially, it was the safest city, and it still is at this point. It has the lowest infection rate, Trondheim specifically, and so Trondheim, the Trondheim region, was actually labeled as a green zone in Norway, the only region that was labeled as a green zone. So people could come and go, or they could come from Trondheim and travel to different parts of Norway without any real issues. But yeah, it's really weird because it's one of the biggest college towns. So it kind of goes to show how people follow the rules over there. I mean, it's whenever the pandemic first hit, I mean, people locked down, they didn't leave, nothing, you know. And then things started opening up little by little, but people were really strict about following the rules. Like they do it for each other. And that's something I noticed. There's a big sense of community about the rules. If they said put on the mask, they put on the mask. And if they said it's not really mandatory, they don't. They say socially distance. Everybody there is socially distancing. Every restaurant, everybody is just following rules. They don't ask any questions. And I think because of that, we had such a controlled environment. So it was really kind of cool to see, in a very different response for sure than a lot of the other countries.
Yeah, especially like here, you know. Oh man.
Yeah.
Wait, so do you have to? You were going to go back like yesterday, right, or something like
Right.
that? Okay, so
Yeah.
do you have to quarantine for a couple weeks or something when you get back, or what's the deal?
No, I don't. At some point, I had like gotten the Rona. No idea when.
Really?
Yeah, so I got tested to make sure that I was okay to fly, and they're like, "Oh, you tested positive, but it looks like it was a while back that you had it." And I was like, "Okay." And so I called the Norwegian government, let them know what's going on. They're like, "Well, because you've had it already, it looks like in the last 3 weeks since I got tested, just show us the positive test, and you don't have to go into quarantine." Because you're asymptomatic at this point. You have been asymptomatic, and because you have already had the antibodies and it's basically out of your system, you're no longer contagious, so you can skip the quarantine process. And I was like, okay, cool, that works.
Wow. You're the first person I've talked to who's actually gotten it, like bass player wise.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, I don't think I think that there are people who've suspected, but it's like everybody thought that they got it in like late February or early March. Everybody was thinking like, oh yeah, I felt like I had a flu or a little something or this and that. Did you feel anything at all, or were you just like?
There was, well, I'm not sure when it was, because I had gotten, before I traveled from Norway, I had gotten a little sick with like allergies and stuff. Mm-hmm. So it could have been that. I mean, I don't know. And then I came here and there was like one day that I had a fever. And it was like 2 weeks after I had arrived. So it was probably that.
Wow.
But that was it. And I was like, oh, it's probably just allergies. To it. The sun had just started coming out, so I'm super, all of the pollen and stuff, and I was like putting it on that. And but yeah, so apparently it was the Rona.
I've heard some people say that, yeah, it can feel kind of like allergies if you have allergies. So there was Joe Rogan's podcast producer, of all people, who is living in Austin now. He was saying they moved in.
I know.
And okay, so you thought, okay. Dude, this is hilarious because I think we've chatted a bunch of times for the podcast. This is the first time we've ever chatted remotely, I think, right? I don't think I've ever
that's true.
Isn't it funny? It's always been in person, which I, of course, vastly prefer. And hopefully November 2021, man, maybe I could set that as a goal, a travel goal. That'd be cool. I cannot wait to get out of the house. I'm going stir crazy. I saw Lauren Pierce. She was one of the last people I saw before the pandemic. I was in Pittsburgh and we were like, we were laughing and hugging and whatever. And then 3 days later or 4 days later, I'm in San Francisco, shut down. And I haven't left the city of San Francisco ever since. So I am sitting here like month 10. Wow. I barely left my neighborhood. And so I'm slowly going off the deep end. But that's okay. I can't wait to.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so cool to see all the stuff that you're doing online and keeping active, and I especially like going through these books. I think that's super cool. Just watching you be able to like take them in and seeing how effective they are and what improvements you're catching. And I think that's actually really useful.
Oh, thanks, man.
in the virtual way.
Well, it's a sort of thing I had been wanting to do, but life just always got in the way. And so now I got plenty of time. So people like Hal Robinson just did this gold edition of the quad that he's sending me. So I'm going to do a review of that. And then I've gotten into making I've been meaning to like get better at Photoshop and After Effects and stuff for a couple years. And so I'm making these like stupid bass history videos. I've got one that I'm going to
they're awesome, man. They're awesome. I love them.
Thank you. I'm working. I've got one where I'm comparing Bottazzini to Elvis. That's the next one. And I'm busy photoshopping Bottazzini's head onto Elvis. And I mean, it might be the result of someone losing his grip on reality, but it's been fun to like, and like the topical stuff, like why I would talk to you any day of the week, but like I guess we're probably talking is like that. Why is the bass section always late? And it's fun. Or why do conductors think that, or what? And so I've been meaning to do topic based things like that for a long time. But video seems to work a little better than the podcast, because the podcast is more of like a long form kind of thing. And so that's something I've been meaning to do, and we'll sort of see how that shakes out. But if I can't play any gigs or do any travel, sitting around and work, my poor wife, I call her over 10 times a day and I'm like, look at what I did to Bottazzini. And I've got,
my gosh.
This morning she's like, oh yeah, this looks like Monty Python. So I've tried to level up so that I think I'm anyway. So that's what I've been up to.
Well, I'm glad you're keeping active. It's really fun. I mean, I've been, especially during the pandemic. I mean, I'm not a social media fan. Like, I just don't like the active posting and stuff like. So I'm not really active. But man, I admire everybody that does it, because it is a commitment just to be able to set it up and to make a post and to make it engaging. I have to get into it because it's where the market is now. But
yeah, I'm trying to embrace the idea, and I think I stole this from Joe Rogan. So they're talking about is like post and ghost, like a post and then just like because I like everybody, I can get sucked into that, and then I'm like, I feel bad about myself now, and I've wasted an hour.
Exactly. That's the thing I didn't want to do. Yeah.
And I mean, I've sort of felt that way for years anyway. And now with the news cycle and just everything, it's like, the worst thing I can do for my mental health is like go on Facebook or even log into the San Francisco Chronicle website. So I try to sit down and animate historical figures and do bass research, and then post and ghost, and then like once every couple of weeks or whatever, go in and see what's working and what's not. So
that's a good idea, and it's working really well, especially with all of your posts and everything. I think you're getting a lot of traction right now. It's super cool.
Every day when I sit down to practice, I get out my phone and I boot up Modacity, which is my practicing companion, and I have a specific routine I go through. And here is Modacity founder and CEO Mark Gelfo on what he does each day with Modacity.
What I do when I load Modacity every day is, if I don't have a playlist constructed already, what I do is I go in and I think, how long do I have to practice right now? Okay, I've got 40 minutes. Cool, I'm going to do 5 minutes on meditation, get my body state right. I'm going to do scales for 5 minutes, and I'm going to visualize, and I'm going to do this piece that I'm working on. You just set it up, see the budget, and follow the budget effortlessly by delegating that to the phone.
Letting my phone do all those logging details has been so great for my practicing. I can't recommend this app highly enough. Love it, love it, love it. Learn more at modacity.co. And we have a special offer if you go to our site for lifetime access to this app. It's so cool. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modacity. This episode is brought to you by Dorico, the advanced music notation software from Steinberg. And one of the coolest things about this piece of software, there's so many things, but one of them is their popover option. And it has sped up things so much for me when I'm working in scores. Here's Senior Product Manager Daniel Spreadbury on how popover mode works.
There's like hundreds of notations that you might want to create, and trying to remember what to type, is it Command Shift Alt, Vulcan Death Grip 7 for this particular notation. But the nice thing about a popover is all you have to remember is the letter of the thing you want to create. So D for dynamics, T for tempo, M for meter, K for key signature.
It might seem like a simple thing, but you would not believe how much that has sped up my workflow. And I'm not even really a composer. I do a lot of arrangements, I do a lot of exercises, but it has taken my workflow probably at least up to 5 times faster. Just that one mode. I can't say enough good things about Dorico. I love it. I use it every single day. There's a free version, Dorico SC, that you can download that lets you do practically everything for up to 2 stabs. So check it out. Dorico.com will take you to their page on Steinberg's website. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Oh, thanks, man. I mean, it's one of those, like I said, it's one of those things that I've kind of had in the back of my mind, and had a bunch of like 3 or 4 month pandemic projects, and now I just don't see myself leaving San Francisco until I don't know, summer maybe. And so I'm just thinking, well, what do I want to do with the next 6 months? And apparently it's do bass research and make stupid bass history videos. So that's fun.
And you're doing some editing on the quad? I got the first edition.
I'm not doing editing. I'm going to just do a review of it. But some of those other books, yeah. Brent Edmondson is the person who helps out with Hal with all those books. And so he and I have been in touch about it. And so a book is en route. But
cool. Yeah, Nicole, I've been thinking of doing something like that with this book called Sound in Motion. Have you heard of it?
No,
it's a really good book, and I've just been a little bit like, it's not necessarily a bad thing, and I don't want to discredit anything that has been going on now, but I've always been, I think we've talked about it before, like a stickler about prioritizing phrasing and music over technique, and it's just always been my shtick, and like especially now, recently, there's been tons and tons and tons and tons, like overwhelming amounts of videos about technique and books released on technique and this and that on technique and technique this and this and that, and I was like, man, who's talking about how to make a line and how to bring out the music, things like that. So I read this book called Sound in Motion, and this guy had like all of my thoughts just there, everything that I was frustrated about, and he even wrote it in such a tone that was also kind of almost a little bit frustrated, but he was like, guys, come on, we have to maintain an emphasis on music making and music direction for the sake of the audience especially. And but I've been thinking about doing this with Marika, where we get together on a podcast and just kind of talk about it, review the book, and just sort of give people insight on how to build phrases.
I love it. Keep me posted with that. And Sound in Motion is the name of the book.
Yeah,
let me just look it up right now. Just so I'll pick up a copy. That sounds like it's up my alley. And it's
wonderful.
Hey, let me. The way you play the bass, like, is the phrasing, like the musicality that like oozes out of everything you do on the bass in a good way. Is I can see why a book like that would resonate. I will. And who's the author? Sound in Motion.
I forgot his last name. McGill, I think.
Okay, cool. McGill. Okay, I'll just look it up. Just since got it. Cool. There's a performer's guide. Hey, since I opened up Chrome for a second, I just, before we hopped on, got a message from one of the San Diego Symphony bassists with a photo of some music. And she said, can you please identify this piece for me? I'm going crazy and I can't sleep at night. So can I just screen share and see? Because I, for the life of me, cannot identify this. But here, I will screen share and go over. And so here, I'm assuming you can see that. I know this top part is Marriage of Figaro, right? That little thing in D major. But then do you recognize this, the last 3 lines on the page?
Is it something like, what's his name? This Norwegian composer looks like, well, not Norwegian. It looks exactly like...
Is it like Nielsen? You're not thinking Nielsen.
Yeah, I was thinking Nielsen, maybe one of like the weird symphonies. But...
Yeah, it looks hard. It looks hard like Nielsen, so it could be.
Yeah.
If it pops into your mind at some point, like in the middle of the night, send me a message and let me know, because I feel like I can't recognize it. I thought, that's not Beethoven, is it? And I quickly opened up a couple parts and it's like, I don't think so. So
no, yeah. I mean, check with Marcus Machado if it is Nielsen, because he's been playing through a lot of Nielsen music.
Oh, yeah, it's interesting. Do you guys play, or have you played any Nielsen in Trondheim, or have you played any Nielsen in general?
Yeah, I played. I don't remember which Nielsen. I think it was Nielsen 4 or 5. Okay. I think, and it was right after I did the Sphinx competition. It was crazy, man. I did Sphinx, and then I had to show up to work late because of my flight. So I had to show up on Monday, like right at like 11 or 12 or something like that. an hour after rehearsal started and just sit down and play Nielsen.
Oh,
It was rough. It was immediately just the hardest stuff. It was really rough, but
well, it's funny because when Herbert Blumstead was the conductor in San Francisco, he did a ton of recordings of all the Nielsen symphonies or most of the Nielsen symphonies, and so the San Francisco Symphony has a tradition of playing those pieces, and they don't do it as often now that it was MTT, and then now. I'm blanking on his name, the new guy. But anyway, they haven't done a concert with him yet because of the pandemic. But I was subbing the week before they were doing Nielsen 5, and they actually asked me to do Nielsen 5, and I looked at my calendar and I said, no, thank you. I was just like and it was just funny because everybody backstage, we were doing some lighter program when I was subbing. Everybody was practicing Nielsen 5.
Yeah, it took weeks. I mean, it was so weird. I mean, the bassists practiced a lot, but for like a good month, the bassists were all just like, "Hey, can I use the room? Can I use the room?" Like, it's just super funny.
Well,
it's a tough one.
I think Michael Kurth in the Atlanta Symphony. Oh, no. You know who it was? Dave Kreibel. This is super deep cuts, but anyway, you'll appreciate it. So I interviewed this horn player who's maybe in his early 80s now. He was principal horn of the San Francisco Symphony for 20 years or so. Before that, he was in the Detroit Symphony principal, like in the 60s and 70s. And then he got hired by Fritz Reiner in Chicago in the 50s. Like, so he's just full of stories. But he was telling me, I don't know if this is true. He was telling me that the reason Nielsen Nielsen symphonies are so hard in general is that, what did he say exactly? It was like he wrote his first symphony, which wasn't that hard, and nobody played it. And so he kept making them more difficult with the hopes that people would play them. And now that I'm actually saying that seems like madness, because that would maybe make people less likely to play them. But there was something about how he was frustrated and trying to like up the ante in each one. So I don't know if that's true or not, but the hardest concert I think I've ever played in my life was Nielsen 5, Nielsen clarinet concerto maybe, and then this Nielsen overture, this like bonkers, and the overture was like all 3/8 16th notes, just like page after page after page, and it was with a gig orchestra too, so it was like the most stressed out I've ever seen this gig orchestra. Like I think the conductor regretted it. I mean, it went okay, but I've never seen a more uptight kind of vibe in the orchestra.
Yeah, it's really weird, especially to get it to sound good, because it can just easily just sound like, technical exercises, everybody line up on the beat, right? But our challenge was really to get it to have an aesthetic beauty, which is really difficult, and just running 16th notes, and
Well, I was remembering back to, I think it was Andres' event, and you were about to go out and play, or it was the day you were going to play your recital, or you're going to play, and I just remember you listening a lot backstage, and I think you were listening. Were you listening to yourself in a previous recording, or were you listening to a recording of the piece, or?
No, I think, I don't know if I mentioned to you what it was, but I had this like really weird backstage tradition.
Yeah, what is it?
I went and did some. I was going to do a minor in psychology, and I'd done a lot of the courses. I'd almost finished it, and I took this one course that kind of messed me up, and I was like, I need to study more, and I don't really have time for this. And it was called it's something a lot about the biology of psychology. Psychophysiology is the name of the class, and basically tells you how your brain works whenever these chemical reactions are going on, which chemicals are going into where, into what synapse, and blah, blah, blah. And it's in detail. And I, of course, didn't have the time to remember everything. But the one thing I did learn was that in general, your body has counteractive drugs for anything that's happening. So if you have anxiety, your body wants to go into homeostasis. So it'll send out the counteractive drugs to get your body back down to home base. So I was just thinking, okay, well, what if I just tried it and I did something like where I know I'm going to go on stage and I'm going to get nervous. I did suffer from a lot of like nerves early on. So I was like, well, if I'm going to get nervous on stage, why don't I just try to immediately, before it even starts, to just pump my body with chemicals in the opposite direction. So bring my body down a lot. So like really get, the depressive chemicals, all of those chemicals so backstage, I listened to a lot of music that brings me to points in my life that were really low. Like in college, whenever I was like frustrated with things, I would listen to like a specific set of music, mostly Max Richter. from sleep. And if for some reason it just puts me in this place where I'm just really low and I get myself low, and it humbles me. First of all, it makes me remember that that's sort of, inevitably where we're going. And it's this thought like we're reconnecting back with our destiny. And our ideas of making a mistake just sort of fly out because it's not that important anymore. So that's one thing that it does psychologically, but really physically, it sort of sends out all these chemicals that whenever I get nervous, it's not so intense. And it's really proven to work for me, at least.
This episode is brought to you by the Practisma Practice Journal. And not only does this journal track your progress throughout 16 weeks, but it encourages you to find joy in your practicing. And here's Susanna Klein, author of Practisma, on the topic.
I don't think I was very good at finding joy in practice until I started working with others to try and create a little joy for them, and then kind of saying, well, why don't I do that too? And the empowerment thing, it's just, these are all kind of related. I mean, if you don't feel empowered, meaning if you don't feel like, not, hey, I'm great, but yes, I'm headed in the right direction. I'm making progress. In the future, things will be good, better.
I'm a big fan of this journal. I've gone through all 16 weeks myself on my own personal journey. It is so cool what Susanna's created. It's packed with research-based strategies to turn your ho-hum practice into extraordinary practice, and it really works. Learn more at practisma.com, where you can download the introductory chapter of the journal for free. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. I'm so happy that my course, Beginners Classical Bass, is out in the world on Discover Double Bass, and we've been getting some great feedback. Here's Barry Green, instructor of bass at The Ohio State University, former principal bassist of the Cincinnati Symphony, and author of The Inner Game of Music. Barry writes about the course. This wonderful, extensive course includes 14 chapters of 66 lessons, varying in length from 1 to 8 minutes each. It is so comprehensive. While it is called a beginner's course, this only means that the course begins with the parts of the instrument, including how to take the bass out of the case. However, it also takes the player through the most advanced left and right hand techniques, including shifting, pivoting, harmonics, positions up to thumb position, tuning the bass, scales and arpeggios, as well as left hand techniques of dynamics, bow placement, articulations, including portato, staccato, and slurring. Barry, thank you so much. And folks, if you haven't checked it out, you can find it through the link in the show notes, or just visit discoverdoublebase.com/Jason Heath. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Wow. That's really cool, because you don't, from an outsider perspective, you don't strike me, there's not, nerves are not evident in the times I've seen you play. I had confidence and the phrasing, like we were talking about, those are some of the first things that come to mind. So that's interesting. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, now I've been focusing a lot more on just being able to explain it now. That's, of course, the hardest part, right? For me, it's come a little bit natural. It just, a lot of the music, it just makes sense, right? It's genius writing, most of it. So it's really easy to follow the line and stuff. But how to bring it out and make it effective, of course, and verbalizing what works and what doesn't is really difficult. So that's why I was really impressed with this book, because this guy was talking about it, of course, with orchestral works and orchestral excerpts, which I think is even more difficult to bring out the line in and make it sound like a piece of musical, like a musical fragment, a musical masterpiece, approaching it that way versus approaching it as like a school of thought or a technical exercise for your class, really keeping this musical mentality. So I was really impressed with this book.
Cool. Well, hey, and by the way, the door is always open if you and Mauritian or anytime, if you want to even just like take over the podcast, if you want to put something out in long form, verbal form, but you don't want to like launch a weekly podcast or whatever, the platform is yours if you ever want to use it for anything. Just let me know. Happy to help. Obviously, share out and spread the word. But if you want a venue to air some ideas, I always love that. That's only happened probably like 9 or 10 times since I've done the podcast. But I always think I think that's part of the fun of this sort of format.
Yeah, I'll talk to Mix about it. I mean, we were kind of like just debating even like how the heck we would even get a podcast starting. It's something we've wanted to do. But we really, the one thing we both knew is like something we want to share with people.
Yeah.
I think it's really good information.
And if you end up starting your own podcast, let me know. I'll obviously spread the word, and I'd love to have you on and chat about it too. But if you don't want to, if you don't want to go to the trouble, feel free to you can do a guest takeover anytime you want. Here.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you. That might actually be more realistic. So.
Well, it's one of those things. Podcasting is easy, but it's like a lot of little steps. That's the thing, that there's nothing hard about it. It's just a lot of little steps, and that's one of those things. And you're like, before you realize it, you're like, oh, there are like 12 steps. There are 15 steps or whatever. So it's one of those. I think it's easier to start a YouTube channel for sure, even though like video is a tougher thing to do, but audio, it's just like there's just like. None of it's hard. It's just about, oh, now you need some artwork. Now you need to submit it. Now you need blah, 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 blah. So it's, Anyway, that's an extremely long way of saying.
Yeah, I'll definitely reach out if I'm having any issues or something like that. I mean, you definitely know what's going on with that. So I'll definitely keep in touch with you about it.
Cool. Well, so, and again, I'll talk to you any day of the week. I love hanging out with you in person, and hanging over Zoom is a good time still. But, so I love to use, I try to stay off social media, but when I get on, I like to use it as an incubator for ideas. So I put out that why are bass sections always late? Why do conductors think bass sections are always late? And I got inspired by watching that, or listening to that great Toscanini bit of him just like tearing the bass section to shreds. So
it's a weird topic, man. And we in the bass group, I think it's really weird. It's kind of one of the only few things that we're really self-conscious about is getting our beat to line up. And I think in general, we've found a way to make it work. But I mean, is there any specific question that you had, or?
Not really, except a couple of things would be like, we could talk specifically about Trondheim, since you're principal there, and then I don't know what the traditions are, but I know in different parts of the world, or maybe just with different orchestras in general, you have traditions of being quite with the conductor on the beat. Or I remember playing with Daniel Barenboim like 20 years ago and being astonished. He would give the beat, and it would be literally a half a second later the orchestra would play. Wow. Boom, which is just like, it's almost like there are two different TV shows going on. There's like the orchestra and then the conductor, and then there's everything in between. And some orchestras, it varies depending on the guest conductor. So that's a very messy way of saying asking how does it work in your orchestra?
Yeah, in our orchestra, we don't really have a long-lasting tradition or anything, and it seems like we're building that now. At least just the way that we're lining things up, and especially I don't want to use the word aggressiveness, but we're really on top of it. Like, we really want to be on top, and we help really drive as much as possible, especially with time. We really do, I think, focus together on our timing. What are we listening to? What instrument are we listening to? Who are we looking at whenever we get to these tricky spots where we have to be together with X, Y, and Z, right? Mm-hmm. And but I think our tradition now is just being tight. We really like being tight and together. And but the one thing that we do a lot, especially whenever as principals, we kind of get rotated out every now and then. And whenever a section member is rotated out, they go and listen to the rehearsals and they talk about what they're hearing. And almost every single time, whenever they go to listen, and every time I've gone out and listened to concerts, for example, or rehearsals, the basses are just always late. They're always late, and it's usually and I think it's because it has this blossoming effect. The sound has a sonic blossom, so it's not only blossoming as an instrument, it like fills up the cavity. The sound fills up the cavity of the instrument, and then it gets released out. So it's a lot of air it has to fill up, right? And then on top of it has to move through all the bodies. It has to move through all of the instruments in front of you, and so it just takes a second. It's just every time. And so what we have found to work the best is to go by what we see, and not necessarily the conductor. But if we want to play together, then we have to go with the instrument of the highest sonority. So it's usually the violin. The first violin is leading something, and we just have to play it together. And we watch the concertmaster's bow, and right whenever we see the bow moving, not what we hear. If we're already late, if we listen, but by what we see, we play, and the sound will usually line up right away. Yeah, it's that sonic blossom, man. I think it really can drive some spots to turmoil.
Well, it's one of those things that I think it's just such a vastly different perceptual change between what you're doing there in the section on the stand and then what's happening in the hall. I mean, I've done similar things where I go out and listen. I don't think I've ever said, "Oh, basses are early." I don't know if I've ever said that in my life. They're either on time or very frequently, like you're saying, late. And it's that perceptual effect. It's like you got to get like 10 feet away to feel that blossom, like you're describing. It's just a different. Yeah. It's a different. It's a different thing. So you're watching the concert mass, you're watching that bow moving, and then you're lining up. That's common tactic.
Yeah, and I think especially as as like principals, Eric and I, the other principal, we if anything, it's really about the first rehearsal. Just knowing what spot is going to be the problem, what we're going to kind of do as a section leader to give some confidence to the group to know when to play. Mm-hmm. And that just gets them, it gives them the confidence to say, okay, this is where we're going to play. We're not going to hesitate. We're not going to play early. We're not going to play late. But the first rehearsal is where it's all at. And so we kind of do most of our prepping thinking about how this is going to work. How we're going to do this thing. And especially with the concertmaster, even there's been a number of times where we have really difficult spots and we know that they're going to come. We just go and tell the concertmaster, hey, we're going to have some sort of connection here, because otherwise the basses we're going to be done. We're in the dirt, Pizzicatos actually are right there. Usually we found that it doesn't have a blossom like the bow does. Whenever you pitch, it's right there at the beginning. The sound is there. But the problem is of course, your timing. The waiting part. Everybody has this like sense of hesitation. So as a section leader, we of course have to find ways to give them the confidence to know that, okay, we're going to be moving here. Don't hesitate so much. And after that, we sort of get the hang of it. But with the bow, especially, I think I was watching that video of Dennis Whitaker slowing down the bow whenever he was doing the lawnmower. And I was like imagining what it would look like whenever you did that with a violin or a cello. I think if you had slowed it down at the exact same speed, you would find that the strings would be moving a lot faster. There's just a higher frequency. So getting the air to move, at this tempo versus this tempo is, of course, going to be changing how it's affecting the ear, how it's hitting the ear, and how it's affecting the air around it, right?
Right, so, and it can be particularly tricky if I think we bass players would like to think that we are the foundation of the orchestra, that we're the people who are setting that beat. That may be up for debate, but may likely also not be up for debate. We probably are serving that role, maybe with a couple other instruments. And so if the foundation is late, you're in trouble. And so trying to get, but the forces are aligned against you, unless you're really cognizant of it, it seems.
Yeah, especially the visual thing is against you. Like the only instruments that have visual contact with the basses are the first and second violins. Mm-hmm. And then after that, the other part of the motor is the viola and the cellos usually. If they don't have a melody or they're not doing something, but the violas are always doing some sort of boom chuck or something. And the cellos are we're either playing the cello part or they might have a separate harmonic line. So whenever the conductor turns around and says, follow the basses, how the heck are the violas or the cellos going to follow? I mean, of course, depending on your setup, right? But how the heck are they going to follow you? I mean, they can't turn around and play and look at us, right? And that's where we have to get the connection. So my solution, and I told the principal violist and the cellist, and we kind of found that a good way to do it is just to follow the person with the highest sonari. So for example, if we're in a tricky spot where first and second violins aren't playing for some reason, and viola, cellos, and basses are playing together, and we have to stick together, and we're bowing as a bass group, then the basses and the cellos follow the violas. So we follow them visually, but sonically the violas and the cellos want to try to make sure that they're lining up with the basses. That's their mental and sonic goal. But their visual goal is to follow the voice, the highest voice, because that's where the ear is going to go. That's usually where the audience is listening for anyways. But if we want to be together in time, as long as we're lining up sonically, and that's in the back of our head, with our visual cues set on the highest voice, and we have high chances of success.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's very tricky to say, like, follow the basses for so many reasons, like you're describing. concertmaster and principal second can see you, but even if they can see you, they can't see you the way you can see them. They're not seeing necessarily both hands clearly. The bass, there's a little bit more of a limited range of motion, perhaps with the bass, perhaps not. But like, there's nothing clean like the visual reference of a violinist.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, and especially like remember whenever we were in, I was in Bossa Nova, we worked so much on the visualness of being able to play together. Whenever they're like, for example, Daniel had to lead a spot. He's like, man, I'm so jealous of these violinists that can just drop and lift their scroll.
Mm-hmm.
If they just want to give a cue for an entrance and play, it's just so simple. But how do you do that as bassist? And that's exactly the problem that we have as a bassist in an orchestra.
Yeah, well, I learned in my very limited like youth orchestra conducting career, I quickly learned the how relatively useless it was to try to demonstrate anything on bass. I'd have to say hold on and run to the back of the orchestra, and then everybody would try to turn around and they couldn't see what I was doing, and even if they could, it was so many octaves down. Versus violin, there's just the precision of that instrument, and then if you're talking at a professional level, obviously same, but there's even more to it. Have you ever played around with in various orchestras with having the basses on the first violin side of the orchestra? That's something that I've done many times in my career. Has that been a part of your life?
It was a bigger part whenever Urbanski was around. So our previous chief conductor, he liked that setup a lot. And this is the first time I've actually done it was whenever we had played, I think, Beethoven 4 or something. And this was fairly recently. We did Beethoven 2 and then we did Beethoven 4. And this was in the last 2 months. We had that set up. And I think I really like it, just especially because we had more of a connection with the winds. And that's something that, at least in our group, we want to have more of a connection with them somehow as a bass group. So it was really nice to be just in the middle of the horns and in connection with the clarinet and our bird's freaking out here, and the oboe, and then we have the first violins right there. So the first violins are really on top of it.
Yeah.
But the second violins, where it was like this setup was where we saw the second violins and the violas, but then we of course still didn't have contact with the cellos because they were all their backs were toward away from us, and the first violins were not with us. So.
Yeah, it's one of the big disadvantages, I think, in that setup is that you lose that visual contact with the concertmaster as the principal bass. But it's cool. I know that the back of the first violin section usually loves it because you actually feel the bass right there, and it's interesting.
Yeah.
Have you ever played around with any less conventional setups, like having the basses like Stokowski style, a wall in the back, or splitting the bass sections up, or anything like that? I've done a little bit of that in chamber orchestra. I'm just curious.
No, I haven't done so much of that. No, I think maybe at some point the orchestra did, but this was before my time. I heard Urbanski was really shifting the basses around a lot, and he was a little bit more experimental. But a lot of the conductors that we have had coming in haven't really messed with that so much. No. But the cool thing about that setup that we had where we were behind the first violins is that, maybe we didn't have the eye-to-eye contact with the first violins, but we did have a lot more of a sonic contact with them. We can hear their sound a lot easier, and they're usually the melody we have to follow anyways. So we would have the visual cue of the scroll right there with us. We couldn't maybe see the bow so well, but usually the concertmasters that we had coming in were pretty clear anyways. So we found it actually not so difficult to follow, being behind them. We had a easier time following them sonically and visually.
What's the just like thing? I don't know much about Norway and their double bass traditions in general. Oh, do they follow any particular school? Do you see more French bow, German bow? Do they have like an Italian influence, a Germanic influence? Is 5-string the norm in that in overall, or what are just some of the common threads of Norwegian bass culture, I guess?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. Whenever I was auditioning, I was going to audition for the Trondheim Symphony, and I went to that TCU Bass Fest. I guess the very last one that had happened before, of course, COVID. And I think, was that 2 years ago?
I think so, yeah.
Almost 2 years ago, yeah. And so this was like before I auditioned. And I was telling my teacher I was going to audition and this and that. And he's like, well, Don Stief is going to be there, and Igor Elisev is also going to be there. So you should talk to them and then talk to them about the traditions, this and that. So I went out to done. This is the first time I met him, and I got the introduction from my teacher, and then I just asked him, so, hey, is there any sort of schools, any things I've got to be watching out for? And he said, no, there's really nothing you should, we don't play with the school. Norwegians just like to hear good music. That's what he said. And I followed that tradition. I was like, okay, great. That means just go out there and play musically. And that's what they liked. And the group itself that I'm in, that was their intention too, just to hear somebody that went in and played musically, and of course showed that they knew what was going on with the excerpts. But our section is mixed, and I think a lot of the other sections in Norway are also mixed, bows, French and German. We have one 5-string in the group, and that plays actively with us. I don't know so much about the other groups, but I don't think there is per se a like, for example, like in Berlin or something like that, where everybody's playing 5 strings. I don't think anybody is doing that in any of the orchestras in Norway.
How have you enjoyed living in Western Europe? How's that been? I mean, that's a gigantic question, I guess. But like, yeah. What's the experience been like? I've only been a tourist. Maybe a month is the longest I've spent over there. But what's it been like? Yeah.
I think it's been really nice. It's very cozy. It's all the time just really cozy, and people really just enjoy their city. They take a lot of pride in their city and their parks and their exercise and the outdoors. And being an American, I never really went outside because, in Dallas and stuff, there isn't really that many opportunities unless you drive 45 minutes to the local park, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. But there, it's just everything is in walking distance. So if you wanted to go to the park and like to really get lost in nature completely outside of it, takes 10 minutes on a tram, and then you're in the woods, in the middle of the woods. So people really they don't take that for granted there. They really talk about it a lot and get you to go there. So that's something that I found that was really nice, is this connection with Earth these people seem to have.
Well, I can relate somewhat moving out here to San Francisco, which is a place where there's just a lot of natural beauty accessible to you. Chicago probably has some similarities to Dallas in that, you have to drive probably 3 hours from Chicago to see anything that's not like a flat cornfield. And just being somewhere that's just more, you're more access to nature, that has had a very, I think, quite a positive impact on my just overall state of well-being. Have you found yourself getting outside more? And has that been, how's that been for you? Just, in terms of your psyche maybe, or your musical, inspiration or whatever?
Yeah, the first thing that I noticed is because it was so close, I was living really close to work. I could just walk to work every day. So I still walk to work. I ended up moving after almost about a year to a new place that's even closer. So I would just walk like maybe 10 to 15 minutes. It's really wonderful just being able to walk. I'm like, man, I love just walking to work, no matter rain or snow or what have you. And it just gets your body warmed up for work, especially you're about to go sit down, especially if you sit down while you're playing for I don't know how many hours. And then and you have to be active and awake and all that. So it's really nice to get the body moving beforehand. So I really am going to miss that if I were to ever leave. It's something that I don't know if I will have the good fortune to find in any other place, because it's just very lucky. And most people do that in Trondheim. It's a small enough city to be able to bike to work or to walk to work, or maybe take a tram down 10 minutes and then bike the rest of the way. People do that quite often. Some people ski to the tram and then get on the tram and then bike the rest of the way. It's it's that kind of place.
There's nothing like being able to walk to work is like the greatest gift. I think I had many years where I couldn't do that. And now I don't even know what my work is. But when I'm like subbing with the San Francisco Symphony, for example, I walk every single day, and I love it. It's about 45-minute walk or something like that. I'm feeling great. I'm getting there. And I love, one of the great things about walking commutes is you can time them exactly. Like I know exactly, like there's no what's the word? Congestion. There's no like walking congestion. I don't, not that I've run into anyway. So it's, and I get there and I feel great and I'm like warmed up, body's feeling good, get to the base. And it's just versus I think back to all those car commutes where I'm like, then I hit the traffic and then I'm tense and then I get to the parking garage and it's it's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
I like the driving part that you can think. You have opportunities to think, and that's really nice. Even if you pop a podcast on or something, your brain sometimes just goes somewhere else and your ideas come. And that's something I do miss. I do miss this meditative thing about driving. But walking just seems to really be opening up. It just opens up your body in a different way. It maybe, in the coldest times of the year, you'll get warmed up after 2 minutes, especially with these thick layers and your body's getting warmed up, and then you go out to work and then you're fine. But that's sort of the experience in a nutshell, just being really connected with Earth, and it just brings it back to you and the world around you. It's usually you're just stuck in your head about who knows what, and it's something really irrelevant and not important, or fixating on something you probably shouldn't. And this connection with the world sort of makes you just forget about that for a second. Like the sun. I mean, here it's crazy. Like I came back and I never really realized it, but the way that my parents' house is set up, there's not a single place for natural light to get into the house. Like we have this outdoor patio and there's like a few windows, but there isn't like a lot of direct sunlight that comes in. We have this extra spare house. There's not a single place for a lot of direct sunlight to come in. And then in the main house, there's only 1 or 2 windows that have access to direct sun. And I was like, man, I need sun. So I'm always outside now, just trying to get the sun. And I took it for granted, but there, I mean, whenever you're there, I mean, you don't have an opportunity, no matter how upset you are or whatever, the sun's not going to come out for you. Right. It's completely controlled by forces that we have no control over yet.
Right.
And let's hope it stays like that. But I understand that the human mind has its own desires. So, but it just goes to tell you, I mean, like there's just so many bigger moving parts than your own little problem. And so it's a humbling experience, and having to deal with these massive forces every day.
Yeah, well, I have a similar vibe out here in San Francisco. I go after we get done talking, I'm going to take my dog for a run up on the waterfront, and I look at the Golden Gate Bridge and Marin headlands in the background, and it's like there's something about just having a view and getting out in nature and seeing this. I can't. It was such a radical shift for me to move somewhere it's generally nice all the time. Where Chicago, it's generally not nice. I think Chicago only has like, I might be getting this wrong, but something like 30 days of full sun a year. It's quite a cloudy place, maybe a little more than that, certainly partial sun, but it's generally not a good day in Chicago. I mean, define a good day, but it's, versus like somewhere with a little more access to nature. It's remarkable how that's, at any point, certainly during this pandemic, I'm glad I'm not locked away in somewhere with no natural light or such, but
like that's like Bergen too. Like Bergen just has all that rain every year. It's insane. I mean, they like apparently sometimes like break the record for the most rainfall, or like most consecutive days with rain or something like that. And with the only other place is a rainforest or something like that. It's crazy. And then you're just like, how do you do it? But people just, they just kind of put their heads down and they go for it. And they have way bigger ambitions beyond that. And I think that's what's so important about especially music and our professions, is that it gives us meaning beyond our everyday job. It's something huge. Like we're having this conversation right now about perhaps a subjective matter, right? I mean, I'm sure there's some physics involved, but this idea of like subjectivity of like how they want the bassist to be placed in this specific piece, right? And because it creates this artistic value, and we can't put a thing on it. It's so beyond us. It's like being able to having the power to control the sun. It's way out there. So it brings us so much meaning, and I think it's a really cool experience to be a part of.
I know. Yeah, well, and like, Bergen maybe a little bit similar to like Seattle or something, or only more extreme. But like, I go up there, I have relatives in Seattle and Portland, and I think, boy, it's like day 25 of rain in a row, and I think I'd rather and 38 degrees Fahrenheit, and I think I'd rather have it be 20 degrees Fahrenheit and snowing than like 38 and rainy, for a month on end. But I mean, you get used to everything, and there's a beauty in that too. But I do like having that in moderation, which it sounds like.
Yeah, that's snow, man. Like whenever you get the snow, that any bit of sun that comes out warms up. Yeah. It warms up because of the snow. It's wide and reflective, right? So you actually get a little bit more of this like insulated feeling. But once it starts snowing, everybody's happy. There is a point where it rains a little bit. And it's really miserable and cold and a little bit windy. But then whenever the snow comes, it actually warms up. It feels like it warms up. But yeah.
Well, I've got this vision in my mind of Trondheim in November 2021, Kusevitsky Concerto.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to try to make that happen.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Okay, cool.
And I was telling the bassist, it'd be really cool to have you there. And I think Dan would love to have you down there in Oslo too. And the guys in Bergen and Stavanger. It's a lot of people with a lot of cool history and stories out there. And especially also with all their cool instruments. It'd be really cool to have you down there and, document what's going on.
Well, I would love to, and I hope to do so on a grander scale as travel starts up again. Like I had been getting going with doing these like 2-week-long trips, and I only did a few. I was in Australia for a couple of weeks in 2019. I was in New York City and those are such fun because it brings some microphones. I'll probably bring some cameras these days now, and really spend time with people, like soaking it in. That Australia trip was great because I would not only talk to people, but I would see concerts in the groups. I'd really get spend time in the city, go out for food and drinks with them, and really take in the culture. So the plan is to do more of that, not less. So I'd love to get over and explore the country.
Yeah, and I think people are going to love to see you doing that, getting out and doing it, just showing that this thing is over. It's coming soon.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a good country to start with too, because it sounds like you've handled things a little bit better than.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's going to be one of the first countries to fully recover. I mean, they started giving some early doses already over there to, I guess, the front line workers. And since it, of course, has a smaller population, I think it'll sort of get to turn around pretty quickly.
Okay, good. Let's keep in touch about that in particular. I appreciate it, man. This is so fun. So I don't keep track exactly, but this must be at least the fourth time we've talked for the podcast because
I think it's the third. Yeah.
Well, I chatted with you and the Bossa Nova people, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So if we count that, and then we've done in Andres's event at ISB. Yeah. Maybe that's it, or maybe another.
Yeah, I think it's 4 times.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Probably 4 times. I think. Yeah,
you're getting into the club of regulars. It's great. You and Danny Zeman and a few other people. So
yeah, cool, man.
Thank you, Aaron. AaronOlguin.com is the website. Everything's linked up in the show notes. I have so many great memories of hanging out with Aaron in Tijuana, Mexico at Andres Martin's wonderful festival, hanging out with him at the 2019 ISB convention, hanging out with him in Dallas, Texas, and Denton, Texas back in 2017 around the Brattlesage competition. What a fantastic talent. Definitely a rising star in the bass world and just a great human being. He is such a great and genuine and thoughtful person. I'm sure that comes through in today's conversation, but boy, do I get such a charge out of hanging out with Aaron, whether it's remotely like this or certainly in person. So thank you, Aaron. Thank you for listening. If you didn't check out this video and you've been listening to the last few episodes, you've listened to like hours of content that made its way into that video. So go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Contrabass Conversations, or just go to our website and you can find it there. I think I called it Why Do Bass Sections Play Late or something. Actually, that sounds like a really bad title. Maybe I should retitle it. But it was a lot of fun to do. It's been fun to take little snippets from these longer interviews and sprinkle them in. It's a great excuse to connect about a specific topic with somebody that I admire and respect, like Aaron or Tom and everybody that I've talked to for these last several podcasts. I've got some that that I did for previous videos I haven't even put out yet, and I'm going to be doing more like that for sure. If you want to hop on and talk about a specific topic, where I put these solicitations, is that the right word? To chat about these topics, I put them in the Contrabass Conversations Facebook community group, and I sort of despise Facebook, but it's at present that's where those go. So I don't despise looking at those messages in that group. If you go to contrabassconversations.com/community, that'll take you to that group. If you are a legitimate bass playing human being, you will be admitted. We have to kind of keep the spammers out of that group. It's gotten to be, I think it's around 6,000 people, and every day there are like 20 spam requests. So we're trying to keep on top of that to keep the quality high. But if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not a spammer. And if you want to talk about one of these future topics, just go in there. I usually pin it as an announcement. And yeah, so this is the fourth of 4 videos. It is Friday afternoon. What is it? July? No, January, Jason. January 8th. Got the farmer's market tomorrow. I'm going to go take the dog for a walk in just a moment. I got to just do the final steps on these podcasts. I have 11 steps. Apparently, I'm talking more about podcast process today, but I have 11 steps that I, Jason Heath, have to do on these podcasts before they can go out the door. And none of those steps take a lot of time, but they all are a little bit of time. And so what it means is one day every 2 weeks, I just lose it to the podcast. And I'm just doing all this editing stuff on the back end. And then I do the interviews every week. I usually take a day and just do a ton of interviews, or maybe every couple weeks and do a ton of interviews. So though it may appear like I am constantly working on this podcast, I am actually only dipping in and doing podcast related stuff for a couple of very focused sessions, let's say 1 to 2 times a week. Otherwise, I'm working on other projects. I've been increasingly working on these video projects, which have been fun for me. It's been a good excuse to develop some visual storytelling skills that I've been meaning to do for a long time. I still am fairly amateurish at all this kind of thing, but it's been very fun. I find myself waking up in the middle of the night with a video idea, or waking up at 5 a.m. and working on a video idea. And that's usually a sign that I'm into what I'm doing. So again, check those out on my YouTube channel if you haven't before. Let's get out of here, folks. Thank you so much to the team that puts these episodes together. Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Mitch Mooring, Trevor Jones, and Krista Copper. Mitch makes beautiful basses in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Learn more at mitchmooring.com. I am your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life at the low end of the spectrum.